I'm Jesse Pettibone, sophomore studying environmental economics and policy. I'm currently a student leader with OSU Divest.
I'm Jen Christian Myers. I'm the faculty advisor for the Student Sustainability Initiative.
I'm Ken Winograd, and I'm a faculty member in the College of Education, and I work among other groups with people who want to be elementary teachers. And my professional area is literacy education. And I'm a member of OSU Divest, a group of faculty and students who come together about a year now and committed to the idea of the OSU Foundation divesting out of fossil fuel.
And I'm Mike O'Malley. I'm also a faculty member in the College of Education. I teach the Foundations class, which is basically a history and philosophy of education. I also teach adolescent psychology. My area is secondary social studies and language arts. And I've been involved with OSU Divest for a little over a year now, I guess.
Awesome. All right, so we can talk a little bit about how we want to structure the conversation. Really, I feel it's like an educational piece. So we want to identify what is divestment. So some people might not know what divestment is. And then we can talk about what's going on here at OSU, a little bit of history, because I know I keep hearing a lot about divestment in OSU, and I'd like to hear more about that. And then maybe we can talk about how it impacts the student body, and how their leadership and values might be affected. How should they think about divestment? I figure we just go around and have a conversation. I don't really know if we need a facilitator per se. I'm probably the least informed as far as sustainability out of the people sitting here, so I can make sure to ask the clarifying questions and stuff like that. Any other ideas about conversation flow or structure or anything like that? Any questions?
I think it might be helpful or useful or most interesting if we just play off of each other. And if we play off of each other, thanks.
And maybe some historical context before we start playing off of one another about what divestment has meant, in terms of the last, over 100 years. Maybe, this is not something new. Maybe, Ken, you're well versed in this, and maybe that will provide some context for where we want to go.
Okay, sure, I can start. I can talk about divestment and what it means. I looked up the word divest in the dictionary before I came over here, and your basic technical definition of divest is to shed or dispose of. And divestment in the real world relates to two areas of social cultural practice. One is divestment is a practice of corporations and companies to get rid of assets that are no longer valuable, and they dispose of them, and they reinvest in something else. So there's a financial or physical type of divestment. If you Google divestment, you'll most likely get hundreds of sites that describe the financial dimensions of divestment. But then there's a social dimension or rationale divestment, and that has to do with institutions engaging in disposing of assets for social reasons, for social reasons, and mission-based institutions have a long history of using divestment in response to perceived social problems, perceived societal problems. For example, the Quakers in the middle of the 18th century divested out of slavery. And that's one of the first recorded divestments, social divestments in U.S. history. And then, since then, there have been many divestments. Notably, many universities in the 60s divested out of Dow Chemical in response to its participation in the Vietnam War and the use of napalm. And then in the 70s, 150 or so universities and many faith groups divested out of tobacco in the 70s. In the 80s and early 90s, it was apartheid. So now the big push on American universities, on the university campuses, and really around the world is fossil fuel divestment. The shedding, the selling off of assets in the fossil fuel industry in response to the climate crisis.
Great. Yeah, I didn't really think there was too much history. I guess I just assumed that divestment would come from, kind of current events and sustainability type issues, but it does make sense that you would have to uninvest from things in the past.
Right. So, one of the big questions is, so if we divest, what do we reinvest in? And that's a pretty ill-defined question. And, in our urging the foundation to divest, what would make most sense to them is reinvesting in, conventional stocks or stock funds in the market, like technology stocks or pharmaceuticals are very valuable. But the position of a lot of student groups around the country and faith groups is that we reinvest in enterprises that are centered around renewable energy and things like that.
Definitely.
Ken, do you know, was that an issue when there was a call for divestment in apartheid or tobacco, for instance? Like, were foundations saying, what should we put these resources into?
I don't think so. I don't think there may have been a particular perspective on, what to reinvest in, but the big driving force in that period was to stigmatize South Africa and to isolate South Africa, and divestment was the campaign. It was an effective campaign.
I'm curious if that question is being raised more often in this case because people don't feel as committed to the moral issue, and so.
I think that our asking the question of what we should reinvest in is tied to why we should divest in the first place, and it comes from a lot of different places. Because the fossil fuel industry is so ingrained in everything that we do. And so they have reign over the entire energy sector, but they have that for a reason. They lobbied 140,000 every day? 400,000 every single day in 2012 in our federal government to keep their subsidies and to make sure they could still have their, basically, monopoly on this sector. And so we're kind of stuck. We don't have a lot of choices. And so we're stuck continuing this pollution and causing climate change.
The job was to raise the endowment, and the reason why is as the state started divesting out of higher education, the idea was, what is the purpose of higher education? Is it a public good or a private good? Mm-hmm. And it used to be, in a Jeffersonian kind of way, it was thought that you went to a university so you could intelligently participate in democracy. That has kind of waned as we've seen, the rise of professional schools. We've seen a rise of, middle-class status anxiety, an economy that isn't producing jobs. And people come here, they don't think of it necessarily as a way to participate in democracy, but to get an education and to pay for it as little as possible. And so this kind of privatization of higher ed has resulted in the importance of the endowment and the investment portfolio. And so if you look at places like Harvard, they have over $30 billion endowment, tax-free, that they invest through really competent investment management firms that they pay about, I think it's a 0.3 of 1% every year, which is a lot of money. And they get returns, according to Thomas Piketty in his new book, Capital in the 21st Century, of almost 11%. I don't know of many investments in this economy right now when you get a return of 11% and it's tax-free. And so so people have looked at this and say, well, we need to participate in this to raise the endowments, to provide the scholarships, to provide the the funds we need for expansion at the university level, which is one of America's few growth industries. And we've really seen the shift in funding go from state funding to endowment, kind of philanthropic capitalist kind of investments. And university presidents have gotten very this is very important to them. So when something like OSU Divest comes along and starts raising questions about investment policies and investment strategies, this is like very novel for a lot of universities because they've never really had this kind of endowment before. Many of them, like OSU, they haven't been scrutinized by the students. And one of the things that we mentioned in the educational aspect of looking at OSU Divest is we have this OSU Foundation that funds lots of stuff here, and nobody really knows where they invest or how they invest. And I don't even know if they do because they hide management fees. And as our investment portfolio has risen to $1 billion, we can now take advantage of very savvy investment firms that we really don't know how they're investing, unlike smaller colleges like Hampshire College, for instance, in Amherst, Massachusetts, which is divested because their return is a lot smaller. They do not take advantage of these investment firms because their investment portfolio isn't that large. So this is a whole new, territory, I think, for places like OSU, where the endowment reaching $1 billion, the return on it, maximizing return, so to help the university. And I think that's very commendable in some ways. But one of the things OSU Divest is looking at, there's an ethical element to investment strategies, and particularly when we're dealing with climate change, we really need to be scrutinizing where the money is going, and are we contributing to environmental conditions that are going to make life on this planet a lot more hazardous, a lot more Hobbesian. So those are the type of things we want to bring to the fore. And the educational part of this is, getting the message out that this is a big part of what goes on here. And, we're all, the beneficiaries of this, but we also have a moral obligation to look at where the money is going because we're part of this university.
There is an ethical dimension to how we invest. And you find that foundations around the country that are oriented towards social causes, like the Wallace Fund and others, in their missions, it's the ethical, social dimensions shape everything they do. It's who they are. But in most foundations and most institutions, the responsibility of the foundation is, and we call it the fiduciary duty, is to serve the interests of, in this case, the students in the university, which means generating a support for programs and scholarships and infrastructure. This idea of the foundation having a larger social lens and looking at the big picture, looking at the future, looking at things like intergenerational equity, the future of our students, the needs of the future of the students, it's kind of a recent thing for them, and that historically that's not been their lens. I mean, their lens has been looking down the bottom line, and but circumstances have changed, and which is the climate crisis, and it's crucial. It's incumbent. It's a very serious matter of the future that they look up, and they bring a broader vision of their purpose and what it means to serve the interests of the students in the university. I think a profound interest of the foundation and all of us is that Oregon State University operates in a livable climate, that we have a livable climate so our students can learn and get an education and prosper and go out and have lives.
Right.
Without that, what's the point?
Yep. Mike?
I just want to add that this is, is going to, I think, requires a sea change in investment strategy. And many people argue that the fatal flaw in Adam Smith's conception of capitalism is he didn't factor the cost of the environment into the pricing system. So one of the things that I think, we're going to cap and trade, carbon taxes, that, many of our investments get a free ride in terms of the external costs they cause people living on this planet, like climate change. And we need to really look at that and say, what's the real cost here of investing in some entity that is harming other people who live on this planet, and that we want people to be cognizant and students to be cognizant of the cost of using fossil fuels on other people and on the planet, and that we need to factor this into the pricing system. And by doing that, I think we can have a more ethical way of investing and looking at the bottom line in a different way. And I think it's what Ken's been talking about, in looking through it a different lens. So this is another aspect of this we really want to bring to the fore, is that when you go to the gas pump, you're paying a lot. You should be paying a lot more than you are, because the external costs involved in this are quite steep.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, Mike, and I agree with what you were saying as well, Ken. I mean, for me, I see divestment as it's an opportunity to look towards the future, and instead of kind of just going through the motions. That's how I see it. I don't know how investing works with endowments and such, but I'm sure it's really complex, and I think a lot of it is probably based off of social interactions and networks of people. And I think I see divestment as a chance to kind of pivot towards not just networks of people, but also just looking at the community and society, and maybe people who can't actually contribute to the endowment, but who are going to be living in the world that the endowment's investments are affecting. So.
I want to ask Jesse a question for you.
That was where I was going.
Or you have something to say. I have a question for you. Divestment's a really radical strategy. I mean, it's an extreme strategy for extreme situations. So slavery was very extreme. Apartheid was an abomination. Divestment is a sensible strategy if you have a heartfelt sense that there's really a serious problem here. And last week, Jesse and I and a few other people from our group met with a representative group from the foundation for sharing of information. It was the first time after 13 months of asking the foundation to meet that we had our first face-to-face. It was very nice. It was a very nice, lively discussion. And early on, I got a sense that the representatives from the foundation didn't really get the climate crisis. So remember, I stopped and I asked them individually, what's your sense of the climate crisis? How urgent is the crisis? How concerned are you? And the first rep said it's very serious. He says it's a existential problem of humankind. The next representative said, I'm not tracking it, I'm not following it, I'm very busy doing my job, managing the books. The third rep said, I don't think there's a climate crisis. I think we're in a cooling trend that hasn't gotten warmer for 15 years, and he basically denied the urgency of the crisis. And I never made it to the fourth representative. I just never got there, and he didn't volunteer where he was at. Jesse, my question to you is, how did you react to that? What do you think of that?
Thank you. That's actually, I've been thinking this whole time. So, as a student, and being out in the field, talking to other students about this, it's in a really interesting place because we're facing all these reports, like the IPCC report, which OSU contributes to, and these things are reporting a future for us that's going to be much worse than today, and that's our reality. That's just what the future is going to be like. And so we come to OSU and to other universities so we can better our lives, and our education is funded by something that's hurting that same exact future. And so when people say, I can't think about that, I'm doing my job, and that job is investing the money, they're saying the ends justify the means. But in this situation, the ends don't justify the means because the means are harming the ends. And so it's very frustrating because we don't get to say, I'm very busy. I don't get to care about that. Because in 20 years, we're not going to have a choice. That's just going to be the way the world is. And so for students and for young people, it's infuriating, it's very frustrating, and it's like a call to action, though, for me personally, that this is like threatening our future, our way of life. In a way, it's threatening my life and my ability to be happy and successful. And so it's frustrating, but I think it's not disheartening.
Jesse, could you explain what the IPCC is, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change? I think some of the listeners may want a little clarification on that.
About what it is?
Yeah.
So the IPCC report comes out every 7 years, and it gets its sources from research institutes all over the world.
Won a Nobel Prize in 2007.
Yeah, it's the most regarded piece of reference information about climate change and the predicted impacts that it's going to have and the causes for it and the things that we can do about it. So, yeah, and we have actually quite a few scientists over the years who have contributed to the IPCC report.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I really like the lens that divestment places on things because for me, the society gets caught in this kind of just, moving through day to day and kind of dealing with challenges as they come. And I always see government being pretty reactive, I mean, they do a lot of foresight, but then there's always those times where something happens, and then they have to redo a bunch of laws. Like the internet is an example. I study the internet in my major, and we're still using some telephone laws to look at legal things in the internet. So I see divestment as a chance to, instead of just going with the flow and then waiting for something bad to happen, we can kind of, deliberately try to forecast into the future and to make decisions, based on tomorrow, with today in mind as well.
I have a question for Jen. Right?
Well, I'd like to respond to that really quickly. I appreciate the sentiment, James, and I think that that's very true, but I also think that we're not really talking about the future anymore. We're talking about now, and the numbers are there. Like the concentration in parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is at critical levels now, and it's beyond where the best climate scientists say that it should be. So,
Right.
and it almost becomes a power issue. Not just in terms of who's controlling the finances and who's these corporate entities that have so much say in what gets funded within educational institutions, but also globally. I mean, it's such a justice issue, I think, that we have the luxury of making these kinds of decisions and have the power in our hands in our nation, and yet so many of the folks that are being directly impacted by climate change currently in terms of storms and catastrophic weather events that are affecting people now don't have that same power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just read a report from UNICEF. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying now from climate change. I mean, through droughts and food shortages and extreme weather, and in the core countries, in the developed countries, we're still a little in a cocoon. We're still a little protected from the worst effects. I mean, we're seeing droughts here. We're seeing the rise of the cost of food. And we are seeing some extreme weather. I mean, every time you open the newspaper here in the United States, there's extreme weather going on, and it's increasing.
There you go.
But right now in developing countries, it's really severe, and people are suffering, and we're not really conscious of that. We don't see it. It's not clear. And this is just after an average surface temperature rise of 0.8 degrees Celsius since the beginning of industrialization, 0.8 degrees. And a 2012 World Bank report, which synthesized much climate science, projects a 4-degree rise in temperature by the end of the century. And that was 2 years ago. And now the consensus is it's going to be much more than 4 degrees.
That's Celsius.
If we don't do anything, if it's business as usual, if we don't engage in drastic change in how we do business here.
Yeah.
So it is here and now. Yeah. One thing I worry. I have children, and they're about your age, Jesse, and when I was growing up, and up until recently, I never thought about the climate. It wasn't part of my everyday consciousness, and it's like we just lived our lives, and occasionally there'd be a weird weather event. And the reality of my children is that in their lives, the climate will be something they have to deal with every single day.
Mm-hmm.
We're not there yet, but it's going to happen, and it's something to really ponder and think about. It's almost like having a chronic illness. I don't know if anyone here has had a chronic illness where every day you have it and you're conscious of it and you have the pain every day. You can never get rid of it. It's just on your mind all the time, and that's what climate's going to be like for our kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one thing I think about. So since we're doing this out of the Center for Leadership Development, I like to throw in some leadership type things and. I've been reading a little bit about, kind of the virtue of sustainability or just that idea that everything we touch and do and interact with has a sustainable component. It's like whether or not it's direct effect on the world or the production of it, and it's like things like the carbon footprint and in divestment's a perfect example. It's like, what are you investing in? Like 5 years ago, I wouldn't have even thought that, people would be thinking about that chain of events. Like, it's not something you're doing, it's not driving your car, it's what you're investing in that could be harmful. So I guess my question is how can we almost get people to start actively mapping out what they're doing or what efforts are underway to get people really to think about their footprint and their impact from a day-to-day basis?
I think it's very hard. I'm studying environmental economics, and something we focus on a lot is externalities. And it's very, very difficult to map that specifically because it's very dependent on the situation. And even when we're making our predictions, you can have like a 2% range versus 3% range, and suddenly your difference is like $1 million. So I think it's very difficult, but I think it's developing. I think one of the things, and it points out a problem of our society, I think, of like we've become so blind to what we're doing, especially in investing. It's like you just throw the money at it, it changes immediately, so you never actually have to know. All you care about is the profits, and it's a challenge in a way for us changing that idea and saying we need to pay attention to what we're doing.
Yep.
I just want to follow up on what Jim was talking about justice. The text right now in justice circles is Michael Sandel's "Justice Was the Right Thing to Do." And at the end of the book, he has this, if I remember correctly, this kind of tripartite way of looking at justice. And number one is kind of utilitarian way of looking at justice, and that's the old notion coming out of Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, the greatest good for the greatest number. And I think, that's the model of justice, I think that's probably, dominant in foundations. The greatest good for the greatest number. You want to produce returns, and that's going to help a lot of people, and you can feel good about what you're doing. And and that's one. And then there's this kind of notion of, a neoliberal kind of sense of justice. Just let the market decide. Don't intervene, kind of a laissez-faire attitude, and the market will naturally make the adjustments it needs to make, and then you'll have justice. And the third one is a kind of communitarian idealism kind of paradigm of justice, where you say, what's happening to the person living under the bridge or the first person in society, and we need to factor them into our decision-making process. And I think one of the things we need to do as we, talk about divestment and, justice and, what's the right thing to do? We really need to look at different ways of looking at how we want to model our society. Do we want the greatest good for the greatest number? Do we want to maximize profit? Do we want to, serve those who are, the least fortunate in the society? And so, and I think that needs to be part of the discussion because it really comes down to, and I think you're right, it's a justice issue, and we need to, come up with an idea or a kind of paradigm or a zeitgeist that kind of factors in climate change as a justice issue.
Definitely.
There's I agree with Mike. I think there's a technical response of how to change, how to get people to reduce, to consume less, for example, or to use less, through the tax system, like a carbon tax.
Mm-hmm.
So we put this tax on carbon, people use less of it, and then there's then there's more incentives for renewable energy and green entrepreneurs to kind of develop that sector. But I think we need to rethink what it means to be happy, effective citizens in the world, and
Right.
how much do we really need, and what does it mean to be happy? And to be happy, do we have to have a lot of things, and do we have to consume like we know that we consume in the West? And it's just rethinking what it means to be alive and to be connected and caring. So that's a big challenge.
Right.
To engage us in a mass way in that conversation, because there's a lot of people who don't want to go there. They just they want their stuff, they want their things, they don't want to be told what to do, and
Which I think we can all understand.
Sure.
Yeah, we can understand that.
Right. Yeah. Is there? So I think it's been a great conversation. We're probably going to wrap things up here in a bit. Is there any last words, or shall we just leave viewers with that thought that that it is that paradigm that we need to change and to reevaluate our connection to the world. But yeah, any last comments?
I just have a question for you two, because I think you both brought up the issue of sustainability. I mean, I didn't even know what sustainability was 5 years ago, and now people are majoring on sustainability. Why has that become such a big part of your life? What were the actual moments? I mean, you're young people, and what happened? Why is this happening? And majors are changing, careers are changing. I think it's happening at the college level. How has it played out in your life or lives?
Yeah, for me, I just think a lot about conditioning. So, like, I've been conditioned in this industrial kind of world, America, especially thinking about before the economic collapse in 2008, it's just kind of things are kind of moving forward, and it's a lot of consumption. So during my life, even if I wasn't the one consuming, I was surrounded by consumers and consumption and growth. So, I mean, I remember Y2K and the internet boom and then the tech boom and all this, basically economic development and growth and production. So I've been kind of trained and conditioned to need things and to think less about just thinking and being, and more about like what am I going to do or what am I going to consume. And I think people should spend more time thinking about what am I going to learn. Or who am I going to have a conversation with? But I feel like a lot of times, a lot of my peers especially, and myself included, are thinking about what am I going to get as well, even if it's just food. But it's I think at least my generation, we spent a lot of time thinking about consumption, because that's kind of the world we were born into.
It's how the world wants to define you.
Right.
With a lot of systems that are set up are hard to box us into that being our only role.
Right. And if you're not consuming, I mean, like going through middle school and high school, there's the people who don't have things, and that's a bad thing, right? That's immediately considered a bad thing. And why is that? It's like they're probably doing less harm to the world, so isn't that a good thing? And why are we conditioned to consume? For some optimism, I see that as a trait that came from the industrial age. And I feel like we're in this post-industrial age where we're really able to communicate across networks and share knowledge and form communities. And so I feel like that's where we can stop trading things we've produced with machines, and we can start trading ideas, hopefully with a small carbon footprint. And so then we can start just to have these massive conversations. And then enter the next, whatever the post-information age is, I guess. We can enter that, and hopefully that'll be more sustainable. Well, I guess it'll have to be a more sustainable institution.
that makes me think of the way we measure our economy. So we reference the GDP a lot, but it's based on like consumption and production. And there's a happiness GDP, and the U.S. isn't the happiest. There's a tiny little country that doesn't have a lot of money, but they're super, super happy. And I think it says a lot about our values as a society. And we say that we want to live happy lives, but it's not actually aligned. Yeah. And then as far as getting into sustainability, it's kind of this sense of, I mean, growing up playing sports, there's this idea of you're only as strong as your weakest player. And we're facing this giant problem that's facing the whole planet, and so everyone on the planet is on the same team. So even though developed nations contribute a lot and don't feel that much to climate change, developing nations feel a lot and don't contribute anything. But we're still on the same team, and so, I mean, acknowledging that those people exist and they matter and they're humans just like us. And you can see that on a small town level today. We were talking about the dog park in Corvallis, in downtown, used to be a homeless camp. And they put up the dog park, and the homeless people didn't go away. They're just somewhere else. And so it's kind of like we still have the homeless people, and so we have this dog park, and it makes the masses happy, but there's still problems.
You know, when I think of where we need to go, which is away from a carbon-intensive economy, a carbon-intensive world, to a low-carbon economy, it means that we really have to significantly reduce consumption. And I sit around, I try to imagine what that will look like if my family's consumption is reduced 60, 70, 80%, which is what people are talking about for us to survive. Our consumption really needs to drop in a very significant way. And I think about, well, maybe it means, I don't know, family vacations are in the community, and we're not flying to, Hawaii, and it means there's if I need a drill, I go to my neighbor who has a drill, and then the neighborhood, I borrow their drill, and I have something they need, and they borrow, and as opposed to my running out and buying a drill, which I often would do in the past, and I used a drill 3 times, and then sits in my garage for 10 years. Jesse?
Yeah, I mean, that brings me back to James's talk about the information age, and we're sharing information instead of consuming. And so with the progress of technology, there's now sites that are based around sharing and borrowing and lending, so that you build those human relations with your neighbors, with people in your town, and suddenly you don't have to consume. It all kind of comes full circle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the old model is like mass production, like let's figure out how many of these things we can build and how fast and how efficient can we build them, and then let's sell them. The new model is kind of, like mass media. We've been in this mass media model for quite a while. I think we're entering a different mass media, though, because now the consumers of media are also the producers. So there's less control and less barriers to entry. So instead of having that same social agenda play out that played out in the industrial age with mass production and in the mass communication age, we have a different social agenda that can play out through the media, and that's created by the citizens.
Yeah, which gets at just a new definition of what it means to be a citizen. I mean,
right.
Traditionally, the citizen, or maybe in the last period, an effective citizen in industrial capitalist societies is someone who consumes, is a shopper, is someone who's engaged in the commercial world, and as opposed to effective citizen is in relationship with people and plant life and animals. It's in relationship and having different kinds of. It's a different conception of what it means to be a citizen. But I think that idea is gonna have a crash ending. It's not gonna have a. It's still very much alive. You turn on commercial television now, and you see those commercials, and that's still really a dominant discourse out there. Shopping,
Definitely.
things that we largely don't need.
Yeah. Mike.
I'm going to try to ask the question I want to ask you. You're a faculty advisor for student sustainability, is that correct?
That's correct.
How do we know what's going on there, and what is going on there, and what's attracting students to that, and what's your mission there? I'm just curious, in terms of just in the spirit of informing the public as to what we're involved in, and that sustainability is what we've been talking about for quite a while now. So
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. So at OSU, we have an organization that's housed within student leadership and involvement, dedicated to helping develop student leadership and creativity around solving some of our pressing issues and moving the campus culture towards a more sustainable culture at OSU. So we hire student leaders who are addressing various sustainability issues. So we have water, energy, alternative transportation, waste reduction, landscape, and food coordinators. And then we have a team of support staff as well who are working on our social media and our events and that sort of thing. And we do a lot of educational events on campus and a lot of outreach and support student activism efforts like the OSU Divest movement that Jesse's involved in. And then we also have considerable funding for student projects that are coming from the general student body to do applied research and applied just project investments to make our campus more sustainable. And we're really making an effort to think about sustainability not just in the green lens, but considering the sort of three key pillars of sustainability is environmental, social, and economic. And we are looking to build partnerships across campus and in departments that might not necessarily think of themselves as green leaders, but who are definitely affected and impacted by all the issues that we're tackling. So there's lots of opportunity for students to get involved and really develop their leadership skills in these urgent issues and make a really big difference on our campus because our student committee has committed to prioritizing sustainability on campus. Jesse, I don't know if you want to add anything as a student leader. Jesse's going to be our director next year, so we're excited to welcome him.
Spread yourself even thinner, Jesse.
No, I mean, I think that's very good. I think where we're moving towards this more holistic approach and acknowledging those justice issues and the intersectionalities that, like the cultural centers, the same issues that they're facing with their systems and trying to have a voice of the same issues that we're facing and trying to make change, and that climate change is going to impact everyone. And so acknowledging those intersectionalities, I think, is a really good growing point what we're focusing on.
It sounds to me like it's a microcosm of what we want to do on a global scale. Would that be?
I think starting local is really like the way to go. We've seen in our federal government it's really hard to make change, and so I think that's one of the huge strengths of the SSI is it's very inspiring, knowing that it came from students and it's run by students and the ideas come from students, and it has a very inspiring feel to it.
And like you said, I mean, it's sort of tangible and it's hands-on, so that it's an opportunity for students to apply what they're learning in the classroom directly to changing our campus.
So when students get involved, often they walk in the door. That they know it's something they want to do. But are there discussions in your office about more systematically recruiting students or more aggressively recruiting students? I know that you have a small staff with so many hours in a day.
Right.
And I think a great resource would be students in programs that were explicitly focused on environmental issues and environmental studies, geosciences. Is that part of what you do?
So, should I tackle this first and then you can speak to it? So we are, well, first of all, I'm the first full-time faculty that's been hired to advise SSI, and I've only been on the job since August, so I'll put that caveat in there. But, and we, you know, back to James's point, that sustainability sort of touches everything. So
Including divestment.
Yes.
Right.
So we are we struggle with saying no and figuring out how to define our strengths. I think is an area that we're trying to put some energy into now, because there's so many opportunities that we could get involved in, and we need to clarify, like, what are we best at and where do we want to put our energies. And so that's a process that we're working on now. And to that extent, we invested quite a bit this year in working with partner organizations, because there's a lot of student clubs that are working on these issues and have a lot of energy and membership. And so when somebody walks in the door, we often will just inquire about what their interests are and then plug them into the Sustainable Energy Initiative or the food group, or, you know, there's a lot of clubs that are really closely aligned with our mission. So that's one way that we try to increase involvement. And then we also recruit interns and try to get people involved in the events that we're hosting. So SUT is another example of a partner organization.
Great.
Thank you.
One last suggestion for the listeners. If you really want to read what I think is a definitive text on climate change, it's got to be The Sixth Extinction and Unnatural History by Elizabeth Colbert, which was a New York Times bestseller, and I think it still may be. It came out earlier this year. And if you want to follow up on what's happening to climate after listening to this podcast, you may want to get Elizabeth Colbert's The Sixth Extinction and Unnatural History.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
Could I mention another book?
Oh, yeah.
With a slightly different focus, a few years older than Elizabeth's book, but a book by Bill McKibben called Earth. It's spelled Eaarth, and the two A's is his way of indicating that the planet we live on is different than it was in previous generations, and that's really a great introduction to climate change activism, and it ends with a lot of initiatives toward sustainable Earth. So it's a good book.
Great. Thanks, Kit. Always a fan of books. Any more books? All right. Well, thanks everyone. It's been a great Beaver Nation Voice podcast.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners as well.
Yes.
All right.
My turn. No, you can turn it off.
Okay.
This has been